They're gone.
Are you all right?
Yes, I have the evidence. We need to go.
We will. Just breathe.
The first punch landed before she could scream. Clara Hale had been sitting on the cold bathroom floor for 6 hours, her back against the porcelain tub, her knees drawn up to her chest, breathing through the kind of pain that does not announce itself with noise. It comes in waves. It builds behind the eyes and spreads down through the spine and settles in the hips like something ancient and unstoppable. She had done this before 3 years ago in a hospital room with fluorescent lights and a nurse who held her hand. This time there was no nurse. There was no hospital. There was only the tile in the dark and the sound of Warren moving through the house below her. June came into the world at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in October in the upstairs bathroom of a brownstone on Calloway Street in South Boston. She came fast and quiet the way second children sometimes do, as if they already understand that the world is not a place that rewards making too much noise. Clara caught her with both hands trembling and held her against her chest and felt the small heat of her and said nothing for a long time. She wrapped the baby in a towel she had staged behind the sink 2 weeks earlier, folded and ready because Clara Hale had learned a long time ago that preparation is the only form of control available to people who have very little of it. She had known this moment was approaching the way a person knows a storm is coming before the clouds arrive, by the pressure in the air, by the way things go very quiet. Warren had been quiet for 2 weeks. Ever since the last ultrasound, when the technician smiled and said it was a girl, Warren had gone quiet in the car on the way home and had stayed quiet, and Clara had understood what that quiet meant. She had taken the USB from its hiding place in her jewelry box and sewn it into the lining of her coat pocket, just in case tonight was the night. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. There was a moment brief as a held breath where she thought maybe he was just coming to check on her. Maybe something human had survived in him. Maybe the sound of a newborn, his own child, would reach whatever part of Warren Hale had not yet been consumed by the thing he had become. The bathroom door opened. Warren stood in the frame backlit by the hallway light. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with hands that had always looked wrong to Clara, too large, too deliberate. He looked at her. He looked at the baby. He looked at the towel and the blood on the floor and the way Clara was holding June against her chest like a shield. He said another girl. He did not say it with sorrow. He did not say it with disappointment. He said it the way a man states a fact he has already decided is someone else's fault. Clara did not answer. She pulled June closer and pressed her lips to the top of the baby's head, and she looked at Warren and she breathed. In her coat pocket, sewn into the lining, the USB was the size of a thumbnail and contained 3 years of her life. 3 years of photographs taken in bathroom mirrors. 3 years of text messages she had screenshotted and transferred. 3 years of financial documents she had photographed from Warren's desk in the middle of the night while he slept, because Clara Hale had been a bookkeeper before she had been a wife. And bookkeepers notice things. Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them. Clara had been reading Warren's numbers for 3 years, and what she had found had scared her far more than anything he had ever done with his fists. She did not yet know what all of it meant. She only knew it was important. She only knew she had to keep it. Warren crossed the bathroom in 3 steps and grabbed her by the hair. What followed happened fast and slow, at the same time, the way violence always does, the way it fractures into images rather than sequence. The back of her head against the tile wall. June crying in the corner of her vision, still wrapped in the towel, still where Clara had placed her. The floor coming up. Her ribs hitting the edge of the tub. The sound she made, involuntary animal, the sound of something structural giving way. Warren was saying something. She could hear his voice, but not the words. She was focused on June. She was focused on the coat. She was focused on keeping her left arm between the floor and the lining where the USB sat. She had 3 cracked ribs and a split lip and blood in her mouth when the front door exploded off its hinges. Not opened. Exploded. The frame splintered. The lock tore free. The sound of it ripped through the house like a gunshot, and Warren froze, and in that half second of his stillness, Clara pulled herself toward the wall and put herself between Warren and June. She heard footsteps. Not 1 set, 3. And then a voice, not loud, not raised, but carrying the kind of weight that does not need volume. The kind of voice that arrives in a room and rearranges everything in it. It said, "Put her down." Warren turned around. The man standing at his bathroom doorway was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a black coat that cost more than everything Warren owned. His face was all planes and angles, the kind of face that does not carry expressions so much as it carries decisions. He had a gun in his right hand and two men behind him, both armed, both scanning the space with the practiced efficiency of people who do this for a living. Clara had seen this man before, not in person, in a photograph in a newspaper article, in the kind of coverage that trails certain names through a city like a shadow. She knew who he was, the way people in South Boston knew who he was, not from proximity, but from the careful collective awareness of something dangerous in the territory. His name was Damian Cross. He did not look at Clara. He looked at Warren. He said, "We need to talk." Warren was still holding her coat. His hand was still in her hair. He said, "This is not your business." Damian Cross raised the gun and shot Warren in the knee. The sound was enormous in the tiled space. Warren collapsed, screaming, clutching his leg. Blood spread across the floor. Damian stepped over him without looking down the way a man steps over something that has stopped being relevant, and he crossed to Clara, and he crouched beside her, and he looked at her face. He said, "Can you stand?" Clara looked at him. Her ears were ringing. She was holding June with both arms, and her ribs were on fire, and she was trying to process what had just happened, and she was not certain yet which side of it she was on. He said it again. "Can you stand?" She said, "I do not know." He looked over his shoulder at one of the men behind him and said, "Declan, get the children." The man called Declan moved past them into the hallway. A moment later, Clara heard him speaking softly in Lily's room, low and calm, the voice of someone who understood that a frightened 3-year-old needed a different approach than everything else in this house. He came back with Lily in his arms, and Lily was not crying. She was looking at Declan with the wide, assessing eyes of a child who has learned to evaluate men quickly and had apparently decided he was acceptable. Damian looked back at Clara. He said, "I am getting you out of here." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because your husband tried to use my name to cover a deal he had no intention of honoring, and men who put my name on their lies become my problem." He paused. "And because I am not going to walk out of a house where a man was about to put a bullet in the floor next to his wife and 2 daughters. Clara said he was going to kill us." Damian said, "I know." Clara said, "You came here for a business reason." He said, "Yes." She said, "Not for us." He said, "No." She looked at him for a long moment. Her lip was bleeding. June had gone quiet in her arms, the particular quiet of exhausted newborns who have used up all their protest. Lily was watching from Declan's shoulder, one arm wrapped around his neck, the other holding her stuffed rabbit, looking at the man on the floor and then at her mother with an expression that was too old for a 3-year-old face. Clara said, "Okay." She let Damian help her stand. He lifted her one arm under her knees, one behind her back, and she did not fight him because her body had nothing left to fight with. And she held June against her chest, and she kept her left arm angled, the pocket of the coat against her body, the USB against her ribs, because no matter what happened next, that stayed with her. Warren was still on the floor. He was screaming at Damian, telling him he could not do this, that she was his wife, that those were his children. Damian paused in the doorway and looked back at him and said, "Try to stop me," and then walked out into the cold October night. The car was black and armored, parked half on the curb with the engine running. Declan slid into the driver's seat with Lily still in his arms. Another man, heavy-set and silent, took the passenger side. Damian settled Claire into the back seat and sat beside her and closed the door, and the solid weighted sound of it closing felt like something sealing, like the end of one thing and the uncertain beginning of another. Declan said, "Hospital, we'll have questions." Damian said, "Take her to Dr. Levine." They drove south through the wet Boston streets, through the amber of streetlights and the black gloss of rain on pavement, and Clara sat with June in her arms and Lily pressed against her side and watched the city move past the windows and tried to breathe through the pain in her ribs. She said, "Who is Dr. Levine?" Damian said, "A doctor who does not ask questions." She said, "I cannot pay." He said, "I am not asking you to." Clara looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, jaw set, hands still. She had been in the presence of dangerous men before. Warren was dangerous, but Warren's danger was messy and personal and close. Damian Cross was something different. He was dangerous the way weather is dangerous, comprehensively, without malice and without mercy. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Nothing yet." She said, "That is not an answer." He turned to look at her. His eyes were dark and without expression. He said, "Your husband lied to people who matter and put my name on those lies. That makes cleaning up his mess my responsibility. You and your daughters are part of that mess. Tonight I am handling it. After that, we will talk about what comes next." She held his gaze. Then she looked back out the window. She said, "All right." Dr. Levine worked out of the second floor of a building in Dorchester that smelled like antiseptic and coffee grounds. She was a small woman in her 60s with cropped silver hair and the brisk, efficient movements of someone who has seen too much to be surprised by any of it. She took one look at Clara and started barking orders at Declan, clearing the examination table, pulling equipment from locked cabinets, snapping on gloves. She looked at Damien and said out. Damien looked at her. She said it again. Out. You can stand in the hallway and be dangerous somewhere else. I have work to do. He left. Declan stayed long enough to settle Lily in a chair in the corner, with her rabbit and a cup of juice that Dr. Levine produced from somewhere, and then he followed Damien into the hall. Dr. Levine worked fast and without commentary. She checked Clara's ribs, 3 cracked, none broken, cleaned the cuts on her face, closed the split in her lip with 3 small stitches. She examined June with the thorough calm of someone who delivered bad news and good news with identical expressions, and she declared her small but healthy and wrapped her in a clean blanket and handed her back. She gave Lily a lollipop and a picture book and put her in the corner. Then she sat down in front of Clara and looked at her the way people rarely looked at Clara, directly, without agenda, without pity. She said, "You have been in this situation before." It was not a question. Clara said yes. She said, "How long?" Clara said, 3 years. The doctor nodded. She said, "You are lucky to be alive." Clara said, "I know." The doctor said, "And the baby?" "She is all right, you both are. For now." She paused. "What do you want to do?" Clara looked at her. She said, "I want to be somewhere Warren cannot find me until I am ready." The doctor said, "That is between you and the man in the hallway." She leaned forward slightly. She said, whatever you have been holding on to, you wait until you are strong enough to use it. Do you understand me?" Clara looked at her for a moment. Then she said yes. The doctor nodded and stood and opened the door. The drive to Damian Cross's estate took 40 minutes north through the city and into the quieter dark of the suburbs, past stone walls and iron gates, and the kind of security infrastructure that announces itself only to people who know what they are looking at. Clara knew what she was looking at. She had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to read the architecture of power young. The house was massive, 3 stories of stone and dark glass set behind a tree line that swallowed the driveway. Inside the foyer was marble and quiet, the art on the walls, the kind that costs more than most people earn in a decade. Damien led Clara through the house and up a wide staircase to a room on the 2nd floor that was larger than her entire apartment on Calloway Street had been. King bed, pale carpet windows that looked out over a garden that was gray and still in the October dark. There was a bathroom, attached white tile and clean towels, and no blood on the floor. He said, "The room next door has a crib and whatever the children will need. If you need anything else, tell Declan or Agnes." He turned to leave. Clara said, "Why?" He paused in the doorway. She said, "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. You came for Warren, not for us." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "When I was 12 years old, I watched my mother get shot on the driveway of our house because my father made a deal he could not keep. She pushed me down and told me to stay quiet, and then the window shattered, and she was gone." He paused. "My father did not look at her body. He told his men to clean it up and went back to work." Clara did not say anything. He said, "I walked into your house tonight looking for a man who owed me an explanation. What I found was something else." He looked at her. "I am not my father." He left before she could respond. The door closed softly behind him. Clara stood in the middle of the room for a long time holding June, listening to the faint sound of Lily settling in the next room. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the garden and the high walls beyond it and the distant glow of the city. She did not cry. She was past crying. She set June carefully in the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows, and then she took off her coat and held it in her hands for a moment before reaching into the lining and extracting the USB from its sewn pocket. She held it between her thumb and forefinger. It was small and black and unremarkable, the kind of thing you could carry for a year without anyone noticing. She saw that Agnes had left a laptop on the dresser along with a handwritten note that said, "Help yourself, charging cable is in the drawer." Clara plugged in the USB. She had accessed its contents dozens of times, had cataloged and organized the files with the quiet precision she had applied to everything in her life before Warren had taught her that precision could be perceived as a threat. She knew what was on it. She knew every photograph and every document and every screenshot. So when she saw the file she did not recognize, she went still. It was in a folder she had not created, labeled with a date. October 14th, 2002. 22 years ago. Clara had been 8 years old in October of 2002. She opened it. The document was a contract formatted in the style of a legal agreement, dense with numbers and signatures. It took her a moment to parse the language, and then another moment to understand what she was reading, and then a third moment longer and colder to understand what it meant. The contract was between Warren Hale, acting as representative of the Hale family estate, and Thomas Cross, Damien's father. The Hale family had borrowed money from the Cross organization in October of 2002. The sum was $4 million. The collateral listed was comprehensive property future business interests, and a clause she had to read 3 times before she believed it. Any progeny of the Hale bloodline born within a marital union, contracted after the date of this agreement, would be considered contingent assets under the terms of default. Lily and June. Warren had not married Clara because he loved her. He had not married her because her family owed his the story she had been told. He had married her because the Hale family owed the Cross organization $4 million, and he had been the executor of a plan to use her children not yet born, when he put the ring on her finger, as collateral in a debt that had been accruing interest for 22 years. She was not his wife. She had been a financial instrument, and her daughters were the security on a loan their grandfather had taken out before their mother was in high school. Clara sat for a long time with the laptop screen illuminating her face in the dark room. Then she closed the computer, removed the USB, and sat on the edge of the bed with June sleeping beside her, and held the drive in her fist and thought very carefully about what she was going to do with it. She did not panic. Panic was for people who had not been planning. She had been planning for 3 years. She had not known what she was planning for exactly, had not known the full shape of the thing. But she had known that the numbers in Warren's accounts told a story, that the names in his contacts told a story, that the patterns she had observed and documented and stored told a story that was bigger than one man in one house doing violence to one woman. Now she was beginning to understand the story. She needed to understand it fully before she used it. She needed information she did not yet have, and she needed to be somewhere safe long enough to acquire it. She looked around the room, the high walls outside, the security she had clocked on the way in. The man down the hall who had walked into a house for a business reason and had ended up carrying her out of it. She was somewhere safe. For now, she lay down beside June and listened to the baby breathe, the small, rhythmic sound of it, steady and oblivious. 5 hours old, and already the most important thing Clara had ever done. She thought about the contract. She thought about Thomas Cross signing his name in 2002, and about Damien, 16 years old in 2002, sitting in some room, in some house that probably looked like this one, not knowing. He had said, "I am not my father." She was beginning to think that might be the most important thing about him. She slept for 4 hours, light and watchful. And when she woke, it was because Lily had climbed into the bed and pressed herself against Clara's back with the particular determination of a 3-year-old who has decided that whatever happened last night is over, and what matters now is proximity. Mama, Lily said. "I am here," Clara said. "Where is the man?" "Which man?" "The one who carried you." Clara was quiet for a moment. "She said he lives here. Is he nice?" Clara thought about the gun and the kneecap and the way he had stepped over Warren without looking down. She thought about the way he had said, "I am not my father," quiet and flat in the doorway. She said, "I think he is trying to be." Lily considered this. She said, "His house is very big." Clara said, "Yes." Lily said, "Does he have a dog?" Clara said, "I do not know." Lily said, "We should ask." Agnes knocked at 7 in the morning with a tray of food, and the brisk, warm efficiency of someone who had been running a household for a long time and was not unsettled by the addition of a new mother and 2 small children. She was a solid woman in her late 50s, gray-haired, with a particular kindness that expresses itself through action rather than words. She set the tray on the nightstand without comment. She looked at June and said, "Healthy." She looked at Lily and said, "Hungry," and Lily nodded solemnly and was escorted downstairs for breakfast. Clara ate. She drank the coffee, which was better than anything she had tasted in 3 years, and she ate the toast and the eggs, and she looked out the window at the garden, in the early morning light, gray and damp and very still. Then she went to find Declan Ward. She found him in the kitchen at the island, reading a newspaper with a cup of coffee at his elbow. He was younger than she had expected, up close, mid-30s, with the careful, contained physicality of someone trained to be aware of every entrance and exit in a room at all times. He looked up when she came in. She said, "I need to talk to you." He said, "You should be resting." She said, "I have been resting for 6 hours. I need to talk to you." He studied her for a moment. He said, "Sit down." She sat across from him at the island. She reached into the pocket of the borrowed robe Agnes had left in the room and she set the USB on the counter between them. He looked at it. She said, I have been collecting things for 3 years. Documents, photographs, financial records. I did not always know what I was collecting. I thought I was building a case against Warren. She paused. Last night I found a file on this drive that I did not put there. A contract dated October 2002 between my husband's family and Thomas Cross. Declan's face changed slightly. Not much. But Clara had spent 3 years reading the small signals of people who did not want to be read, and she caught it. She said, you already know something about this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Damien should hear this. She said, I know, but I am talking to you first, because I want to know how much you know and how much he knows before I walk into that room. Declan looked at her for a moment. He said, that is a smart approach. She said, I am a smart person. He said, I am beginning to see that. She left the USB on the counter between them. She said there is more on this drive. Financial records from Warren's accounts going back 4 years. Payments to companies I could not identify. Some of them are significant. Some of them are very large. She paused. I was a bookkeeper before I was a wife. I know what money laundering looks like. I know what shell company structures look like. And I know that some of what is on this drive is not just Warren. Declan set down his coffee. She said, I think some of it connects to the man you are already dealing with. The one Warren was trying to use Damien's name to reach. Declan said Alexei Voss. She said the name back to herself, quietly filing it. Then she said yes. He said, how much of this does Warren know you have? She said he does not know about the financial documents. He thinks I am too frightened to look. She paused. He is not wrong that I was frightened. He is wrong that frightened means not looking. Declan picked up the USB. He held it for a moment. He said, I am going to take this to Damien. She said, I know. He said, this changes things. She said, I know that too. She stood up and poured herself more coffee. She looked out the window at the garden where Lily had appeared in the gray morning light, wearing someone else's too large coat, walking very seriously along the stone path, examining each frost-gray plant with the concentrated attention of a scientist. Agnes was standing at the garden door watching her, and for a moment Clara watched them both, the old woman and the small girl, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she was in the right place. Not safe, not comfortable, not certain, but right. Moving in the right direction finally after 3 years of standing still and planning and waiting for the moment when she would be strong enough. She picked up her coffee. She thought about the contract. She thought about Thomas Cross in the year 2002 and Damien at 16 sitting somewhere in the dark not knowing. She thought about her daughters and the clause in that agreement, the one that had made them collateral before they existed. She was still thinking about it when she heard footsteps in the hallway, steady and deliberate, and looked up to find Damien Cross standing in the kitchen doorway with the USB in his hand and an expression on his face she could not fully read, something between recognition and something that might have been the beginning of anger. He said, where did you get this? She said, I made it. Everything except the file from 2002. That was already there when I found it last night. He said, you have been collecting evidence against your husband for 3 years. She said, yes. He said, and you are a bookkeeper. She said, I was. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Behind him, the hallway was quiet, and the house was beginning to come alive with the sounds of morning, the distant clatter of Agnes in the utility room, Lily's voice carrying faintly from the garden. He said, you knew before last night that Warren was connected to something larger than himself. She said, I suspected. I did not know what. I did not know the name. He said, Voss. She said, yes. He was quiet. He looked at the USB in his hand. He looked at her. He said, the contract. You read it. She said, yes. He said, all of it. She said, all of it. He was very still. She watched something move through him, not visible exactly, more like the air changes before lightning, the pressure of something large and suppressed working its way to the surface. He said, I did not know about the clause. She said, I believe you. He said, about any of it. She said, I believe that too. He set the USB on the counter. He looked out the window at the garden, at Lily crouching now, to look at something in the frost-hard soil, at Agnes still watching from the doorway. He said, my father made a lot of decisions I did not know about. Clara said, so did mine. He turned to look at her. She said, my father took the loan. He never told me. He never told anyone. When he died, the debt went to my name by default because I was the only heir. Warren came to my family 3 months after my father's funeral. He said he wanted to help. She paused. I was 23 and alone, and I believed him. The kitchen was very quiet. Damien said you were 23. She said yes. He said, and you have been in that house for 7 years. She said 3 years of marriage, 4 years before. He was patient. She said the word patient the way she had learned to say Warren's name without inflection, because inflection was a door and she had spent a long time keeping that door closed. Damien looked at her. Not the way he had looked at her last night, the rapid tactical assessment, the calculation of variables. He looked at her the way people look at things they are beginning to understand the true shape of slowly, with the care that complicated things require. He said the contract has a clause about the children. She said yes. He said that clause is not enforceable. She said not in a court of law. He said but Voss does not use courts of law. She said no. He said so, the children are in danger as long as that contract exists and Voss can claim it. She said yes. He said, and the only way to neutralize that claim is to either destroy Voss or make him legally untouchable by a federal prosecution before he can act on it. She said, or both. He looked at her. She said the financial records on that drive. I was not exaggerating when I told Declan what they contain. I have spent 3 years copying every document I could access from Warren's office and his accounts. I did not always understand what I was looking at, but there is a pattern in there that connects Warren's operation to something larger, to cash flows and company names and transaction structures that are not Warren's size. She looked at him. I think what I have might be enough to put Voss in federal custody. I think it might be enough to make the contract irrelevant permanently. Damien Cross looked at her for a long moment. In the garden, Lily stood up and looked toward the window and waved a 3-year-old's full arm wave, enthusiastic and unguarded. Clara raised her hand and waved back. Damien said, I need to look at everything on that drive. She said, I know. He said, start from the beginning. She said, which beginning? He said, October 2002. She nodded. She sat down at the kitchen island. Outside the window, Lily had found a stick and was drawing something in the frost very seriously, with the full concentration of a child who has decided that whatever she is making is important. Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and began. Declan spread the files across the dining room table at 9 in the morning, 3 days after Clara had arrived, and the table was large, and the files were larger printed and organized into folders that Clara had labeled in her precise, unornamented handwriting. She had spent 2 days reconstructing everything from memory and from the digital files, walking Declan through each document, each payment, each company name, explaining the accounting logic the way a teacher explains something to a student who is quick but needs the context filled in. Declan was quick. He did not need things explained twice. By the end of the second day, he had stopped asking questions and started asking different questions. Better questions, the kind that told Clara he was no longer following her through the material, but moving alongside her. On the morning of the third day, he brought in a second laptop, and they worked in parallel him on the structural connections between the company names and her on the transaction timelines, and by afternoon, they had a map. Not a complete one, but enough of one to see the shape. Damien came in at 4 o'clock and stood at the end of the table and looked at what they had built. He did not sit. He looked at the map for a long time without speaking. Then he said, this goes back further than I thought. Declan said further and deeper. Damien said, how much of this is Voss? Declan pointed to a cluster of company names in the upper right quadrant of the map. He said everything in this group. These are shell structures 3 layers deep, incorporated in Delaware and Nevada and one in Wyoming. The money that moves through them comes from sources that trace back to the Voss organization's dock operations in Charlestown and South Boston. The amount is not small. Damien said how much? Declan said over 4 years somewhere north of $60 million. The room was quiet. Clara said the interesting thing is not the amount. The interesting thing is where it goes after the shells. She stood up and pointed to a different section of the map. These accounts here, these are not Voss accounts. These are accounts in the names of private individuals, real people with real addresses in the greater Boston area. And the payments into these accounts correspond exactly to dates when federal investigations into the Voss operation were either delayed, redirected, or quietly closed. Declan said, you are saying Voss has been paying federal officials. Clara said, I am saying the money flows in a pattern that is consistent with that. I am not a prosecutor. I am a bookkeeper who spent 3 years copying documents in the middle of the night. But yes, that is what the numbers say. Damien looked at her. He said Warren knew about this. She said Warren facilitated some of it. Not all. He was a conduit. Small enough to be useful, not significant enough to be a liability if he was exposed. She paused. He thought that made him safe. She said this without expression. He was wrong about a lot of things. Damien said, and this is all on the drive. She said all of it. He looked at the map for another long moment. Then he said, Declan. Declan said, I know. Damien said, how long? Declan said, a week. Maybe less if the right people are already watching. Clara looked between them. She said, you have a contact at the federal level. Damien said, I have a relationship with an agent named Harlow who has been trying to build a case against Voss for 6 years with insufficient evidence. Clara said, and now there is sufficient evidence. He said, potentially. She said, then use it. He said, it is not that simple. If I go to Harlow now, before we understand how deep the contamination in his agency runs, we risk the information reaching the wrong people before it can be acted on. He paused. Some of the accounts in your map may belong to people inside the federal structure Harlow operates within. Clara looked at the map. She looked at the cluster of individual accounts. She looked at the dates. She said, I can cross-reference the payment dates against public records of which investigations were affected. If I can match specific individuals to specific case outcomes, that narrows the contamination significantly. It tells Harlow exactly who not to brief. Declan said, how long would that take? She said 2 days, maybe 3. Damien looked at her. He said, do it. She was already sitting back down. It was on the evening of the 4th day that Agnes found Clara in the library at 10 o'clock asleep in the armchair with June in her arms and a laptop open on the side table. Agnes covered her with a blanket without waking her and turned off the overhead light and left the lamp burning and went to find Damien. She told him she was working herself into the ground. He said, I know. Agnes said she has cracked ribs. He said she knows that. Agnes said she is not going to stop on her own. He said no. Agnes looked at him for a moment. She said, the little one asked for you at bedtime. He said, June cannot talk. She is 4 days old. Agnes said, I meant Lily. He was quiet. Agnes said she asked for you every night now. She left him in the hallway, and he stood there for a moment in the quiet of the large house, and then he walked to the library and looked in. Clara was asleep in the chair, her breathing slow and measured, even in sleep, as if her body had learned not to surrender completely. June was awake, dark eyes moving in the lamplight, not crying, simply present. He sat in the chair across from them and looked at the map spread across the coffee table. The lines and names and numbers that Clara had been building for 3 years without knowing what she was building. And he thought about his father and about the year 2002 and about a contract signed by 2 men who had decided that the future was a resource to be managed. He sat there for a long time. In the morning, he went upstairs before Clara was awake and knocked on Lily's door. Agnes had told him she was an early riser. She was. She opened the door in her pajamas with her rabbit under one arm and looked up at him with the same assessing expression she had worn in Declan's arms on the night they arrived, the look of a child who has developed a very rigorous personal vetting process. She said, good morning. He said, good morning. She said, Agnes said you have a garden. He said, yes. She said, can I see it? He said, it is cold outside. She said, I have a coat. She held it up. It was too large for her, borrowed from the coat closet downstairs, nearly reaching her knees. He said, all right. They walked through the house and out the back door into the gray morning frost on the grass, the garden bare and geometric in the early light. Lily walked beside him very seriously, hands in the oversized pockets of the coat, examining everything. She stopped at a dormant rose bed and crouched down and looked at the canes, the thorns, the gray twisted wood. She said, these will have flowers in the spring. He said, they will. She said, have you seen them? He said, I have lived here for 8 years. She stood up and looked at him. She said, do you like them? He said, I do not notice them much. She considered this. She said, that seems like a waste. They walked to the stone bench by the back wall, and she sat on it, and he sat beside her, and they looked at the garden in the cold morning light. She said, are you going to leave? He looked at her. She said, Mama says people always leave. She said it the way she said most things, with a directness that had nothing aggressive in it, only clarity, the honesty of a child who had not yet learned to cushion the questions that needed answers. She said, are you going to leave too? He looked at the garden. He looked at the frost on the grass and the bare rose canes and the high walls with the city visible beyond them, and the October sky pressing down gray and flat and cold. He said, I am not going anywhere. She looked at him. She said, promise. He said, promise. She looked at him for another moment with those serious 2 old eyes, and then she seemed to arrive at a decision, the kind of internal verdict that 3-year-olds deliver with complete finality. She nodded. She said, okay. She got up and went back to examining the garden, moving from plant to plant, with her hands in her pockets, and Damien sat on the stone bench in the cold and watched her and felt something shift in the architecture of himself, something structural, something he had spent a long time building to resist exactly this kind of pressure. Clara was standing at the back door when he looked up. She had June wrapped against her chest in a cloth carrier Agnes had found, and she was holding 2 cups of coffee. She held one out when he walked over. He took it. She said she does that to everyone. He said, what? She said, ask the question that everyone is afraid to ask. She looked out at Lily, who was now attempting to communicate with a dormant hydrangea. She said she started doing it when she was 2. I think she learned that if you need to know something, the fastest way is to ask directly. He said she is right. Clara said she usually is. They stood in the doorway with their coffee and watched Lily work her way methodically through the garden, and Clara did not say anything about the previous night, about the library, or the blanket, or the lamp. But she looked at him once sideways, and he understood that she knew. It was on that same morning that Declan came in from a phone call with a face that had gone carefully neutral, in the way faces go when the news is bad enough that the person delivering it has had to decide in advance how to manage their own reaction. He said Voss moved last night. Damien set down his coffee. Declan said he took Garrett. The name landed in the room like a stone. Clara looked at Damien and saw something she had not seen on his face before, something that was not the controlled cold she had come to recognize, but something older and more personal. Garrett was a name she had heard twice in 3 days, always in the context of trust, always with a tone that indicated history. Damien said, where? Declan said, we do not know. He was picked up outside the South End office at 11 last night. His car is still there. His phone went dark at 11:14. Damien said, what does Voss want? Declan said, a message came through this morning. He placed his phone on the table and slid it across. Damien looked at the screen. Clara did not look at the phone, but she watched his face and she saw the message register, and she saw him make the decision about how to respond to it, the small internal recalibration, the shift from the personal to the operational. He put the phone face down on the table. He said he wants a meeting. Declan said yes, Damien said in the terms. Declan said he comes with his people. We come with ours. Neutral location, his choosing. He paused, and he wants her there. The room was very quiet. Clara said he knows I am here. Declan said he has known since the second day. We found the source this morning. Damien said who? Declan looked at the table for a brief moment before looking up. He said Raymond Briggs. The name meant nothing to Clara, but she saw what it meant to Damien. She saw the stillness that came over him, the particular stillness of someone receiving information that confirms a suspicion they had been hoping was wrong. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, how long? Declan said, we think since before the night on Calloway Street. We think Briggs is the one who told Warren you would be coming, which means the whole thing on Calloway was arranged. Warren was not improvising. He was executing a plan that someone inside this organization helped him build. The room absorbed this. Clara said Briggs knew about the contract. Declan looked at her. She said that is the only thing that makes sense. Warren needed someone inside who understood what the contract meant and what it was worth to Voss. Briggs gave Voss the contract information. Voss sent Warren the signal that the time was right. Warren went upstairs. She paused. They were not trying to kill me. She stopped. She said it again more slowly. They were not trying to kill me. They were trying to make it look like Warren was out of control so that Damien would come in, find the situation, and be forced to take us in. She paused. Because if we are here, Voss knows exactly where we are. The table was very quiet. Damien said they needed me to take you in order to have a reason to come here. Clara said, and to claim that you are holding Warren's property, which under the terms of the contract gives Voss a legal basis in his world to demand access to the children. Declan said the clause. Clara said yes. Warren did not lose control that night. He performed it for an audience. She said it very steadily. She said it the way she said most difficult things, from behind the part of herself that had learned over 7 years to maintain distance from the things that needed to be said. Damien stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and his hands at his sides and said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own kind of statement. Then he said, I am going to deal with Briggs. Declan said, he is in the East Wing office. He does not know we know. Damien said, good. He turned around. His face was back to the controlled expression Clara had first seen in the bathroom on Calloway Street, the face that had decided something and was not negotiating with itself about it. He said after Briggs, I am going to respond to Voss. I will confirm the meeting. Clara said, and Garrett. Damien said Voss will not move against Garrett before the meeting. He needs Garrett as leverage for the next 48 hours. Clara said, and after the meeting. He said after the meeting, Garrett will be home. She said, how do you know? He said because after the meeting there will not be anything left for Voss to leverage. He left the room. Clara looked at Declan. She said, I want to know what happens with Briggs. Declan said Damien will handle it. She said, I know Damien will handle it. I want to know what handling it looks like. Because Briggs is the reason my daughters are in danger, and I want to understand the decision that gets made about him. Declan looked at her for a moment. He said, sit down. I will tell you what I know. She sat. What happened with Briggs took 40 minutes. Damien came back into the kitchen at 11:30 and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter and drank it. His face told her something had been resolved and what it had cost him to resolve it on the terms he had chosen rather than the terms he wanted. He said, Briggs is gone, not dead. Gone. Clara said, gone where? He said out of Boston, out of the state, with enough information about what he did to keep him running for a very long time. Clara said, that is not enough. He looked at her. She said, I told you this. A man who was willing to put my daughters in the path of Alexei Voss in exchange for money or leverage does not stay gone because you told him to. He comes back. Or he makes a call, or Voss uses him again. She looked at Damien directly. Letting him walk means my daughters are still in danger. Every day he is alive and free is a day he can be used against us. Damien said, I understand that. She said, then why? He was quiet for a moment. He said, because killing him would make me my father. He said it evenly without self-pity as a statement of constraint rather than feeling. He said, my father solved every problem the same way. He said the simplest solution is the permanent one. He said it so many times it became the only thing he knew how to do. I watched it happen. I watched him become something that only knew one tool. Clara said, I understand that. I respect that. But Briggs is not your reformation project. He is a threat to my children. Damien looked at her. He said, I have people watching him. He will not make a move I do not know about. She held his gaze. She said, if your people watching him is not enough, I will not let it go. He said, I know. She said, I am telling you now, so there are no surprises later. He said, I know that too. They looked at each other across the kitchen for a moment, the specific look of two people who have established that they are not the same and are deciding whether that is a problem. Then Clara said, tell me about the meeting with Voss. Voss had chosen a warehouse in South Boston near the docks, the same territory where his operation had run for 2 decades, where the buildings were old and the sight lines were clear, and the proximity to the water meant things could disappear quickly if they needed to. Clara knew the area. She had grown up 6 blocks east of it. She knew the smell of it, diesel and brine, the way the wind came off the harbor and cut through everything. Damien said, you do not have to come. She said, yes, I do. He said, Voss wants you there as a demonstration. He wants to see that you are what Warren said you are, Warren's property being held by me as a statement of possession. If you come, you are playing a role in his theater. She said, then I will play it better than he expects. He said, Clara. She said he has a document that lists my daughters as collateral. That document exists in the physical world, not just in a financial record on a USB drive. If Voss has the original contract or a certified copy, it needs to be in that room so I can see it. And if it is in that room, then I am the only person in that building with a reason to make sure it does not leave in one piece. Damien looked at her. She said you and Declan are thinking about territory and leverage and organizational politics. Those are the right things to think about. But I am thinking about a piece of paper that has my daughter's names on it in a legal structure that your father created and Warren used and Voss intends to enforce. She paused. I am the only person in this who is thinking about that specific thing, which means I need to be in that room. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, all right. She said, thank you. He said, do not thank me. Stay behind me, and if anything goes wrong, you move to the exit and you do not look back. She said, I understand. He said, I mean it. She said, I know you do. The night before the meeting, she could not sleep. She lay in the large bed with June beside her and Lily breathing softly in the next room, and she looked at the ceiling and thought about the warehouse and Alexei Voss and the contract and the 48 hours ahead. She thought about what Declan had told her about Voss, the history, the thwarted revenge that had been building since 2003, when his father had gone to a federal prison on information provided by a man named Thomas Cross. 21 years of waiting, 21 years of watching and building the specific kind of patience that belongs to people who intend to collect on a very old debt. She thought about what that kind of patience looked like from the inside. She thought she recognized it. She heard footsteps in the hallway, quiet and unhurried, and then a pause outside her door. She said, "Come in." Damien opened the door. He was in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, and he looked tired in a way she had not seen on him before. The tiredness that is not physical, but something older. The weight of decisions that do not have clean options. He said, "I saw the light under the door." She said, "I was not sleeping." He said, "No." He came in and stood by the window looking out at the garden, the frost on the grass in the moonlight, the bare rose canes, the high walls. She sat up in the bed, carefully mindful of the ribs. She said, "Tell me something about your mother." He looked at her. She said, "You told me how she died. Tell me something about how she lived." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said she made bread on Sunday mornings. She said the house needed to smell like something real once a week. He paused. She used to say that a house that only smells like money eventually stops feeling like a house. Clara said, "She sounds like someone I would have liked." He said, "She would have liked you." Clara said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because she spent her life in a house with a man who thought everything could be reduced to a transaction, and she never once agreed with him. She fought it quietly and consistently, and without anyone ever seeing how much it cost her." He paused. "You have been doing the same thing for 3 years." Clara said, "I was not as brave as I wanted to be." He said, "You were exactly as brave as the situation required. You survived it. You built something out of it." He paused. "That is not a small thing." She looked at him. She said, "Are you afraid of tomorrow?" He said, "Yes." She said, "What specifically?" He said that, "I will get you into that room and not be able to get you out of it." He said it without deflection. He said, "Voss is not a man who makes threats he does not intend to follow through on. He will have the room set up to control outcomes. He will have more men than he disclosed. He will have a plan for the scenario where the meeting does not go the way he wants." Clara said, "So will we." He said, "Yes." She said, "Then we go in knowing that and we act accordingly." He said, "I want you to know that if something happens to me in that room, Declan has instructions. You and the children will be taken somewhere safe and provided for." She said, "Nothing is going to happen to you." He said, "Clara." She said, "Nothing is going to happen to you because you made a promise to a 3-year-old this morning, and she is going to hold you to it for the rest of your natural life." She paused. "And because I need you to be standing in that room tomorrow night while I do what I am going to do." He looked at her. She said, "I have finished the cross-referencing, the contaminated accounts. I have matched 6 of them to individuals whose names appear in federal case records as either investigators or supervisors on 3 separate Voss-related inquiries over the past 8 years. 6 names, specific documentable cross-referenced. I can give Harlow a list that tells him exactly who in his agency to keep out of the room when he moves on Voss." Damien was very still. She said, "And I have something else. In the financial records, I found a set of payments made 18 months ago to an account registered to a holding company in Wyoming. The payments were large and they were regular, and they came from a Voss shell structure. The holding company has 1 registered agent." She paused. "His name is Raymond Briggs." The room was very quiet. She said, "Briggs was not recruited recently. He has been on Voss's payroll for at least 18 months, which means everything he knew about your operation, your movements, your safe locations, has been passed to Voss for 18 months. She looked at him. The cabin upstate, the warehouse on Meridian, the property in Gloucester. "Voss knows all of it." Damien said, "Gloucester." She said, "Yes." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That is where I would have taken you if the meeting tomorrow goes badly." He said it with the flatness of someone who has just seen the shape of a trap. He said Briggs would have told him. She said, "Yes." He said, "So Voss is not just planning for the meeting. He is planning for what happens if we run afterward." She said, "Yes." She paused. "Which means we cannot run. We have to end it in the room." She met his eyes. "Whatever it takes, it ends tomorrow night." He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the bare garden, and the frost settled, and the city hummed its distant, indifferent hum. He said, "You figured all of this out tonight." She said, "I figured it out this afternoon. I waited until tonight to tell you because I needed to finish verifying it before I said it out loud." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because I do not say things until I am certain." She paused. "Warren spent 7 years telling me that I was wrong about everything I observed and everything I understood. After long enough, you start verifying before you speak, not because you doubt yourself, but because you have learned the cost of being dismissed." Damien said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You are not wrong." She said, "I know." He said it again more quietly. He said, "You were not wrong about any of it. The numbers, the patterns, the contract, Briggs, none of it. You have been right about all of it from the beginning." She held his gaze. He said, "I want you to know that. Before tomorrow. I want you to know that I see what you built and I understand what it cost you, and I am not going to let it be wasted." She said, "It is not going to be wasted." He said, "No." She said, "Get some sleep, Damien." He looked at her. He said, "You too." She said after. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that she filed it away the way she filed everything carefully for later. He left. She lay back down beside June, who was sleeping with the profound certainty of the very young. And she looked at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow, about the warehouse and the room and Voss and the contract and everything she had been carrying for 3 years, coming finally to the place where it could be put down. She thought about Dr. Levine in the examination room on Dorchester Street, the silver-haired woman with the brisk hands and the direct eyes. "Wait until you are strong enough to use it." Clara closed her eyes. She was strong enough. In the morning before they left, Clara sat with Declan at the kitchen table for 40 minutes while the house was still quiet. She walked him through the transmission protocol. She had prepared the encrypted file package containing the full financial map, the 6 contaminated names with their corresponding case dates and payment records, the contract from 2002 with the contingent assets clause highlighted. In a cover document, she had written herself explaining the evidentiary chain in plain prosecutorial language. Declan said, "This is thorough." Clara said, "It needs to be thorough. Harlow has to be able to act on it without briefing anyone on the list." Declan said, "I will send it an hour before the meeting. That gives him enough time to redirect resources and issue the warrants, but not enough time for the information to leak to the wrong people." Clara said, "Send it at 7. We arrive at 8. The warrants hit at 9. Declan looked at her. He said, "You planned the timing." She said, "I planned everything I could plan. The rest is the meeting." He nodded. He picked up the encrypted drive. He said, "Harlow is going to want to know where this came from." She said, "Tell him it came from a woman who spent 3 years as a bookkeeper in the wrong house." He paused. "Tell him she noticed everything." They left at dusk. The city was doing what October cities do in the hour before dark, pulling the light down slowly. Reluctantly, the way something resists an ending, it cannot stop. The streets were wet from an afternoon rain, and the street lights had come on early, and Boston moved around them the way it always moved, fast and indifferent and certain of its own continuance. Clara sat in the back of the armored car with her hands folded in her lap and the USB in her coat pocket and nothing on her face that she had not put there deliberately. Agnes was at the house with Lily and June. She had said goodbye to both of them in the way that is not a goodbye, the ordinary kind, the kind that does not signal anything. Because Lily was 3 years old and read rooms the way other children read picture books, and Clara had not wanted her to read this one. Lily had hugged her legs at the door and said, "Come back soon." Clara had said, "I will." She had meant it the way she meant most things, completely and without reservation, because Clara Hale did not make promises she was not certain she could keep, and she was certain. She had done the work. She had verified the numbers. She had mapped the contamination in the federal structure and isolated the names and built the case from the ground up over 3 years in the dark. And she was going into that warehouse tonight not as Warren's wife or Voss's leverage or anyone's variable. She was going in as the person who held the evidence that ended it. Declan drove. Damien sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for the first 20 minutes, and Clara sat in the back and looked at the city and let the silence be what it was. Not uncomfortable, not empty, but the specific quiet of people who have said everything that needed saying and are now in the part that comes afterwards. She said, "How many men will Voss have in the building?" Damien said, "Our best estimate is 12, possibly more at the perimeter." She said, "And we have." He said, 8 inside, 4 outside. Declan has 2 more positioned 3 blocks north with a clear view of the main entrance. She said, "And if it goes wrong," he said, "Declan gets you out the side entrance on the east wall. There is a car there. Agnes has the children ready to move." She said, "It will not go wrong." He turned to look at her. She said, "I am not being reckless. I am being accurate. Voss needs this meeting to go a specific way because he needs the contract and what it represents to remain viable. If he kills us tonight, he loses the leverage and he loses the legal framework the contract provides. He needs us functional, which means he will not move against us until he understands what we have and what we intend to do with it." Damien said, "And when he understands?" She said, "By then it will be over." The warehouse was on a street that dead-ended at the harbor 2 blocks from a container yard that had been the operational heart of the Voss organization's import structure for 15 years. Clara had looked at this address on a map that morning and had found 3 transaction records in Warner's files that listed this specific street as a delivery point, and she had added them to the folder she was carrying in the interior pocket of her coat. Inside the warehouse was dim and large, the kind of space that swallows sound-high ceilings and concrete floors and the smell of salt and metal and the particular cold of a place that has never been meant for comfort. Portable lights had been set up along one wall bright enough to illuminate the center of the space, but leaving the edges in shadow. Clara noted the shadows. She noted the men standing in them. She counted 8 visible and assumed 4 she could not see. Alexei Voss was standing in the center of the lit space when they walked in. He was not what she had expected. She had built him in her mind from the financial records and Declan's briefing and the photograph Declan had shown her. But photographs do not carry the thing a person carries when they have been waiting a very long time for something. Voss was in his mid-50s, compact and gray-haired, with the careful stillness of a man who had learned early that visible anger is a liability. He watched them walk across the floor with the expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment so many times that the actual event feels slightly anticlimactic. He looked at Clara for a long time before he looked at Damien. He said she is exactly as Warren described. Damien said Warren described a lot of things inaccurately. Voss said he described a woman his family has a legal claim to through a debt that has been accruing for 22 years. Damien said that contract is not enforceable. Voss said in whose jurisdiction. The room was very still. Clara felt the weight of it, the specific gravity of a moment that has been building toward itself for a long time, and she stood very straight and breathed through her ribs and waited. Voss looked at her again. He said, "You know what you are." He said it the way Warren used to say things, not cruelly, which would have required caring, but with the flat certainty of a man who has decided the categories of the world and placed her in one. He said, "You are a debt. You have always been a debt. The only question is which account you settle." Clara looked at him. She did not look at Damien. She did not look at Declan standing 2 feet to her left with his hand near his side and his eyes moving continuously through the shadows. She looked at Alexei Voss, and she felt not anger exactly, but something cleaner and colder, the feeling of a woman who has been told what she is for the last time. She said your father owed Thomas Cross a favor that Thomas Cross decided to call in by giving the FBI enough information to put him away for 23 years. The room temperature dropped. Voss went very still. She said, "I know because I have the financial records that document the payment Thomas Cross received in exchange for that information dated March 2003, routed through a shell company in Delaware that Thomas Cross used for 3 other transactions in the same year." She paused. "It is on a drive in my pocket." Voss said nothing. She said, "I also have the financial records of every payment your organization has made over the past 8 years to 6 individuals whose names appear in federal case files as investigators and supervisors on 3 separate inquiries into your operation. Those 6 individuals received a combined total of approximately $4 million routed through shell structures in Nevada and Wyoming, and the payments correspond precisely to the dates on which each of those inquiries was either delayed, redirected, or closed without action. The shadows at the edges of the warehouse had gone very still. The men standing in them were listening. She said, "I have the original contract between the Hale family and Thomas Cross, including the clause that you have been using as the basis for your claim on my daughters. I have a legal analysis confirming that the clause is not enforceable in any jurisdiction, legal or otherwise, because the debt it references was settled in full in 2009 when my father died and his estate was liquidated. There is nothing left to collect. There was nothing left when Warren married me." She paused. He knew that. He married me anyway as a mechanism to manufacture a new claim on a debt that had already been paid. She reached into her coat and removed the USB and held it up. She said, "Everything I have described is on this drive. Copies of it were transmitted to Agent Harlow at the FBI Boston field office 1 hour ago, along with a list of the 6 compromised individuals in his agency, so that he knows exactly who to exclude from the operation he is currently preparing." She paused. "That operation is scheduled to begin in approximately 40 minutes, at which point federal agents will execute warrants at 7 locations associated with your organization, including this building." The warehouse was completely silent. She said, "You came here tonight believing you held something over us. The contract, the claim on the children, the leverage of a debt that has been dead for 15 years. She lowered the USB. You do not. You have not had anything to leverage since 2009. Everything since then has been theater built on a document that stopped meaning anything the year my father died. She looked at him steadily. She said, it is over. You can walk out of here in the next 35 minutes and have some fraction of a chance at managing what comes next. Or you can stay and explain to Agent Harlow why you are standing in a building that appears in 6 separate federal warrants. She paused. That is the choice. It is the only choice you have left. Voss looked at her. He looked at her the way people look at things that have revised themselves without warning the recalculation that happens when what you thought you were dealing with turns out to be something categorically different. He looked at the USB in her hand. He looked at Damien. He said, you knew about this. Damien said, I knew about some of it. She built the rest while she was in my house with cracked ribs and a 4-day-old infant. Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the 6 names. How certain are you? She said completely. He said Harlow will move against those 6 as well. She said that was the condition of the transmission. Yes. He looked at the floor. He looked at the warehouse around him, the men in the shadows, the dim light, the cold concrete. He was doing the calculation that men like him do when the mathematics have stopped working in their favor, the assessment of what remains and what it costs to fight for it. He said, and if I walk out, she said the warrants are already issued. Walking out does not stop them, but it gives you time that staying does not. He looked at her one more time. There was something in it, not respect exactly, but the particular acknowledgement that passes between people who recognize in each other a capacity they had not anticipated. Then he turned and said something in a low voice to the man nearest him, and the man moved, and the other men in the shadows began to move. And within 2 minutes, Alexei Voss and all 12 of his people had walked out of the warehouse, and the sound of their cars starting and pulling away faded into the harbor noise in the October night. Clara lowered her hand. Damien was looking at her. She said, call Harlow. Tell him Voss is mobile and moving north. He will want to redirect. Damien said her name. She turned to look at him. He said, are you all right? She said, I am fine. He said, Clara. She said, I am fine. Call Harlow. We have 35 minutes. He called Harlow. Declan found Briggs at midnight. He was in a motel off Route 1 in Saugus, 40 minutes north of the city, the kind of place that charges by the week and does not maintain security cameras in the parking lot. The unit was registered under a name that was not Briggs, but that Declan had connected to him through a credit account from 14 months ago. Clara had found that connection in Warren's files, a payment from one of Voss's Wyoming shells to the same alias dated 18 months prior, and had written the address on a note card that she handed to Declan before they left for the warehouse. Declan brought Briggs in at 1 in the morning. Clara was there when they arrived. Damien had told her she did not need to be. She had told him she was going to be there regardless. He had not argued. He was learning she thought that there were certain things she did not argue about. She simply did them, and the energy spent on the argument was energy that could be used elsewhere. Briggs looked worse than she had expected. He was a man in his early 40s, medium height, with the generic, forgettable appearance of someone who had spent a career cultivating unmemorability. He looked at Clara when they brought him in, and something moved through his face, the recalibration of a man who has been caught and is trying to determine how caught. He said, I want to talk to Damien. Clara said, you are talking to me first. He looked at Damien, who was standing against the wall with his arms crossed. Damien said nothing. Briggs looked back at Clara. She said, Raymond Briggs, 9 years with the Cross organization. For the last 18 months simultaneously on the payroll of Alexei Voss, receiving payments routed through a Wyoming holding company to an alias you used for a short-term rental in Charlestown in the spring of last year. She set a folder on the table between them. She said the documentation of those payments is in there, along with records of 6 phone calls made from a burner registered to that alias to a number associated with Voss's personal communications over the past 3 months, along with records of 3 meetings at a diner in Medford between you and a man identified in surveillance photographs as Voss's logistics coordinator. Briggs was very still. She said 3 weeks ago you told Warren Hale that Damien would be coming to his house on the night of October 14th. You told him what time, and you told him how many people Damien would bring, and you told him that if Warren made the situation look serious enough, Damien would take us in. She paused. You set up the entire night, not just as a favor to Voss, as a mechanism to give Voss access to a property and a position he could not reach any other way. She paused again. My daughters were in that house. My daughters are in that contract that Voss was trying to enforce. You knew about the clause, you told Voss about it, and you helped him build a situation that was designed to put my children in the path of a man who intended to use them as debt settlement. The room was very quiet. She said, so I want you to understand something before this conversation goes any further. Whatever happens to you in this room, whatever decision gets made about your future, the determining factor is not how long you worked for Damien and what that loyalty is worth. The determining factor is what you just helped someone do to two children, one of whom is 3 years old and still asks every morning where her father went. Briggs said I did not know he would actually. She said you knew exactly what Voss intended. The clause in the contract was not ambiguous. You are not a stupid man. You understood what you were facilitating, and you facilitated it anyway. He was silent. She said, here is what is going to happen. You are going to give Declan the name of every contact you have in the Voss organization who is not already in federal custody as of tonight. Every name, every location, every communication method. Everything you know. She paused. In exchange, what you provide tonight goes to Agent Harlow as a cooperative disclosure, which means your exposure in the federal case is significantly reduced. She paused again. That is the offer. It is the only offer, and it expires in about 30 seconds. Briggs looked at Damien again. Damien said she speaks for both of us. Briggs looked back at Clara. He looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man arriving at the specific understanding that the person across the table from him is the one holding all the remaining cards and has counted them carefully and knows exactly what they are worth. He said, all right. She said, start with the logistics coordinator, the one from the Medford meetings. He started talking. Warren was arrested at 4:17 in the morning at a motel in Quincy. Agent Harlow's team took him in his room. Harlow called Damien at 4:45 to confirm. Damien was in the kitchen of the estate when the call came. Clara was across the island from him with a cup of tea she had been holding for 20 minutes without drinking. She watched his face while he listened, the set of it, the controlled stillness that she had come to read well enough to know when something resolved and what it left behind when it did. He hung up and set the phone on the counter. She said, is it done? He said, Warren is in custody. Voss was picked up on Route 93 at approximately 2 in the morning. 6 of his people were taken in the warehouse raids. 3 of the 6 contaminated federal officials were arrested at their homes. The other 3 are under surveillance pending additional documentation. He paused. And Garrett was released at a location in Charlestown approximately an hour ago. He is home. Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment, then she opened them. She said, Harlow has the full file. He said everything you sent him plus what Briggs provided tonight. He said it is the most comprehensive evidence package his office has received in a decade. She looked at her tea. He said it is over. She said yes. He said her name, just that. And the way he said it, not the name exactly, but what was in it, the weight of the past 11 days, and the contract in the warehouse, and the things said in the kitchen, in the early morning hours, all of it compressed into 2 syllables. She looked up at him. He said, I need to tell you something. She said, all right. He said the night I walked into that house on Callaway Street, I told you I came for a business reason. That is true. But I have thought about it since about the 30 seconds between walking through that door and seeing what was happening in that room. And I want you to know that even if Warren had not used my name, even if there had been no contract and no Voss and no reason at all that was mine, I would not have walked out of that house. She looked at him. He said, I want you to know that because I think you have spent a long time believing that people help each other for reasons that there is always a transaction underneath the kindness. He paused. There was not a transaction. I saw what was happening and I could not leave. That is all it was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. He said, you do. She said, I have been a bookkeeper for most of my adult life. I know the difference between a transaction and something else. She looked at him. I knew within the first day. He said, and you stayed. She said, I stayed because I had work to do, and this was the right place to do it. She paused. And because Lily slept through the night for the first time in 2 years in the room next door, and I was not going to take her away from that. He almost smiled again. This time it reached his eyes. She said, get some sleep, Damien. He said, you too, she said after. He laughed. It was a short sound, slightly rusty, like something that had not been used in a while, but genuine. He picked up his phone and walked out of the kitchen, and Clara sat with her tea and listened to the house settle around her, The creak of it, the specific quiet of a building that has absorbed a long day and is releasing it slowly into the dark. She thought about the morning. She thought about Lily waking up and asking where the man was and finding him at breakfast, which had become the pattern of the past week. Lily appearing at Damien's elbow at 7 in the morning with her rabbit and her serious questions and her absolute unqualified expectation that she would be answered honestly. She thought about June, a little over a week old now, beginning to look at the world with the focused attention of a child who is taking inventory. She reached back and took the USB out of the coat pocket and held it. It was warm from the lining. She turned it over in her fingers, the small flat weight of it. Then she set it on the counter. Just set it down, flat on the marble next to her teacup in the light of the kitchen lamp. She left it there. She went upstairs and checked on June sleeping in the bassinet, with her fists curled and her face entirely at peace. She looked in on Lily sprawled across the bed with her rabbit and the particular profound unconsciousness of a child who is growing very fast and needs every hour of sleep she can get. She stood in the doorway of Lily's room for a moment and listened to her breathe. Then she went to her own room and lay down and looked at the ceiling and felt slowly and tentatively and with the specific caution of someone who has been hurt enough times to approach good things carefully, something that might be the beginning of rest. Warren Hale was convicted on 7 counts including financial fraud, conspiracy witness tampering, and domestic violence. He received 17 years. The judge read the domestic violence charges aloud in court with the methodical gravity of someone who wanted the record to be clear about what had been done and to whom. Clara was not in the courtroom. She was in Maine by then, and she heard about the sentencing from Declan, who called from Boston on a Tuesday afternoon in October, almost exactly 1 year after the night on Callaway Street. She noted the date. She wrote it in a small notebook she kept in the top drawer of her desk. She did not think about it again. Alexei Voss went to trial 4 months later. The prosecution used Clara's financial map as the structural foundation of the case, presenting the shell company connections and the contaminated official payments as a unified pattern of organized corruption. The 6 federal officials were tried separately. 4 pleaded guilty, 2 went to trial and were convicted. Voss was sentenced to 31 years on 14 counts. The judge who ruled on the contingent assets clause in the 2002 contract read it once, looked up from the papers, and said that in 22 years on the bench, he had never encountered a legal instrument he found more offensive, and he was pleased to render it permanently void and unenforceable in any jurisdiction. Agent Harlow sent Clara a transcript of that moment. She read it twice. Then she filed it in the folder she kept in the bottom drawer of her office desk, the one labeled Simply Done. Raymond Briggs received a reduced sentence under the Cooperative Disclosure Agreement. He served 3 years and was released to a supervision program in another state. Declan kept a file on him. So did Clara. Neither of them expected to need it. Neither of them stopped watching. Damien closed the last of his connections to his former operation in the spring of the 2nd year, a process that took 8 months in the continued cooperation of Agent Harlow, who was thorough and kept his word. Declan took over the legitimate remnants of the Cross organization's holdings and converted them into a property management company that employed 40 people and paid its taxes and did not require anyone to stand in a warehouse at night. He called Damien twice a month and came to Maine at Christmas and had developed over the years a fondness for Agnes's lemon cake that he refused to acknowledge openly, but that Agnes accommodated without comment by always making an extra one when he visited. Agnes herself did not leave the estate when Damien left Boston. She left 2 months later when she was ready, and she took her savings and a collection of recipes she had been developing for 30 years and opened a bakery 2 blocks from the shelter Clara would later found. It was a small place, 8 tables inside, and a chalk menu board above the counter, and it became within its first year the kind of neighborhood institution that people planned their mornings around. She knew everyone's name. She remembered everyone's order. She never talked about the years before and no one asked. 5 years is both a long time and not long at all. Lily turned 8 the 2nd spring they were in Maine and declared that she wanted a dog and a bookshelf of her own and to learn to sail before she turned 9 in that order of priority. She got all 3. The dog was a brown and white mutt named Governor that Agnes had found at a shelter in Portland, and the bookshelf was built by Damien over a weekend in February, slightly uneven, because he was a better strategist than a carpenter, but structurally sound, which Lily declared acceptable. The sailing she learned from a retired fisherman who lived 3 houses down and who took her out on the harbor every Saturday morning and from May through September, and returned her at noon sunburned and covered in salt and utterly satisfied. June turned 5 that same spring and was by unanimous agreement of everyone in the house the most fearless person any of them had ever encountered. She had no memory of anything before Maine, no memory of the house on Callaway Street or the night in October or any of the specific darkness that her older sister carried in the careful assessing eyes she had brought with her from that time. June simply existed in the world as if it had been made for her specific convenience and treated every person in it as a potential friend, pending further investigation, which she conducted by walking up to them and asking their opinion on whatever was currently most important to her, which changed daily. Clara ran the shelter out of a converted Victorian 3 blocks from the harbor. It had 6 rooms and a small office and a kitchen that a volunteer from Agnes's circle staffed on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and it served between 4 and 12 women at any given time, depending on the season and what the season brought with it. She had built the intake protocol herself, which included a section on documentation on the specific and careful collection of evidence on what to photograph and how to store it and why and when. She had written it in plain language the way she wrote everything directly and without softening, because the women who came through her door did not need softening. They needed the information. She trained volunteers twice a year. She had trained 43 women in the first 5 years. Several of them had gone on to train others in other counties, other states passing it forward, the way things that matter tend to get passed forward from hand to hand quietly and persistently. She did not talk about where the protocol came from. She did not explain the USB or the coat lining or the 3 years in the dark. She did not need to. The protocol worked because it was built from experience, and the women who learned it understood that without being told. Damien ran a gallery on Main Street that had become, somewhat to his own surprise, genuinely successful. He showed local artists and some not-so-local ones, and had developed over 5 years an eye for work that other people had not yet recognized as significant, which Lily said was because he had spent so long looking for threats in rooms that he had learned to notice what other people missed. He said she was probably right. On an evening in late May, 5 years to the month after the night on Callaway Street, Damien took Clara for a walk on the beach. It was the kind of evening that Maine produces in May, like a statement of intent. The air still cold enough to require a coat, but the light doing something extraordinary, long and golden, and coming off the water in a way that made everything it touched look like it was being seen for the first time. The harbor was quiet, a few boats, a heron standing in the shallows with the profound self-assurance of something that has been standing in shallows for a very long time and intends to continue. They walked without talking, which was one of the things they had gotten good at over 5 years. The specific comfort of shared quiet, the way 2 people can walk beside each other and not need the space between them to be filled. He stopped near the point where the sand met the rocks where the harbor opened out toward the open ocean, and he turned to face her. She looked at him. He had something in his hand, a small box, dark wood simple. He held it out and opened it. The ring inside was a plain band, silver unornamented, except for 4 words engraved on the inside. She took it from the box and held it in the light to read the words. Choice, not chance. She held it for a moment. She felt the weight of it, which was slight, and the weight of what it meant, which was not slight at all. She thought about the night she had sat on the bathroom floor on Callaway Street and held June for the first time the small, specific heat of a new life, and about the USB in the coat pocket, and the 3 years of preparation and the moment in the warehouse when she had looked at Alexei Voss and said the words she had been building toward for longer than she had known. She thought about Lily asking a man she had known for 12 hours whether he was going to leave with the directness of a child who had decided that the question worth asking was always the one most people were afraid to ask. She looked at Damien. He said, I know we have both been married before. I know what that word cost you. I am not asking you to forget that or to pretend it was anything other than what it was. He paused. I am asking you because of what you showed me. Not about yourself, although that too. About what choosing something can actually look like when you choose it freely without debt or leverage or a contract someone else signed. He paused again. I would like to be chosen, if you are willing. She looked at the ring in her hand. She said yes. He took the ring from her and put it on her finger, and she looked at it in the evening light. The simple band, the 4 words, and felt the specific solidness of it, the way certain things feel real in a way that transcends the physical. She said, I chose you 11 days after we met. She said it simply as a statement of fact, the way she said things she had verified. She said, "I chose you when you sat on a stone bench in the cold and promised a 3-year-old you were not going anywhere." She looked up at him. "I just waited to say it out loud until I was certain you understood what you were being chosen for." He said, "A shelter director and 2 daughters and a dog named Governor." She said, "Yes." He said, "In a slightly uneven bookshelf." She said, "Structurally sound." He said, "I was told that was acceptable." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that takes years to arrive at, the kind that does not perform anything, that is simply what it is, uncomplicated and complete. They stood on the beach in the May evening light, with the harbor spread out before them, and the Heron still in its shallows, and the first stars beginning to appear in the pale sky above the water. And Clara looked out at the ocean and thought about all the distances between here and there, between the bathroom floor and this beach, between the woman who had sewn a USB into her coat lining because she needed to survive, and the woman standing here now. And she thought that those distances were not erased by arriving, but carried, transformed from weight into something else, into the specific knowledge of what it cost to choose differently, and the specific certainty that it had been worth it. Agnes cried at the wedding, which was small and on the beach, and in September, when the light was doing the September thing, lower and longer, and made of something that felt almost like nostalgia, except it was actually the opposite. It was presence. It was the full attention of a world in transition, paying attention to what it was doing. Lily was the flower girl. She took the role with the gravity it deserved, scattering petals from a basket with the methodical thoroughness she brought to everything, making sure each section of the aisle received adequate coverage before moving to the next. June sat in the front row with Agnes and spent most of the ceremony waving at people she recognized and several people she did not. When the officiant reached the point where objections were traditionally invited, Lily raised her hand. The officiant, who had been warned, smiled and said yes. Lily said, "I just want to say that I am really happy." She said it with the complete, unguarded directness she had been bringing to every important statement since she was old enough to make them. She said, "Because now he is really our dad, and we are really a family. And I wanted everyone to know." Damien did not say anything. He reached over and put his hand on the top of Lily's head very gently, the specific tenderness of a man who had spent a long time not knowing what he was capable of and had recently found out. Lily looked up at him. She said, "You promised you were not going anywhere." He said, "I know." She said, "This makes it official." He said, "Yes, it does." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the ceremony with the attentive seriousness of someone ensuring that all appropriate protocols were followed. Clara watched them and felt the thing she had been feeling for 5 years now, the thing she had approached carefully at first because she had not trusted it, the thing that had grown slowly and steadily, the way things grow when they are rooted in something real. She felt it fully and without reservation, standing on the beach in September in the light that was paying attention. She had built something in the dark for 3 years, not knowing what she was building toward. This was what she had been building toward. Not safety exactly, although there was safety. Not rescue, because she had understood from the beginning that she was not waiting to be rescued. Something larger than either of those. A life chosen on her own terms, constructed piece by piece from the inside out by a woman who had learned that surviving is not the same as living, and had decided quietly and irrevocably to live. Declan stood in the back row of the wedding and did not cry, and later admitted to Agnes that he had come very close. Agnes said that was the most anyone could ask of him. He said he supposed that was right. Agnes handed him a piece of wedding cake, and they stood together at the edge of the gathering in front of the bakery she had opened 2 blocks away, its lights warm in the September evening, and watched the ceremony come to its close. They watched the woman at the center of all of it, who had carried a USB in her coat pocket through the worst years of her life and had never once stopped planning for the moment when she would be strong enough to use what she had built. She had been strong enough for a long time. She had simply been waiting for the right door. And on the night a stranger had kicked it down looking for a traitor, what he found instead was a woman who had been quietly building her own way out for 3 years. All she had needed was someone to finally open it. There is a thing that happens to people who have carried fear for a long time, who have organized their lives around it, who have learned the specific grammar of a household where danger is always present and never acknowledged. When the fear finally lifts, when the thing that caused it is gone, and the evidence of its removal is documented and filed and confirmed by federal courts in jurisdictions that do not bend, the lifting does not feel like relief. Not at first. It feels like the absence of something that had become structural. like a wall coming down and the rest of the building taking time to understand that the load bearing is over. Clara understood this from the inside. She had understood it intellectually for years, had read about it in the pamphlets she had collected from the community center near Callaway Street during the 4 years before the marriage, the years when she had been telling herself it was not that serious. It was not that kind of situation she was managing it. She had read the clinical language about hypervigilance and the recalibration of threat response systems and had filed it away the same way she filed everything carefully for the day when it would become relevant. In Maine, in the first winter, it became relevant. She woke at 3 in the morning for 47 consecutive nights, certain that something was wrong. She checked on Lily. She checked on June. She walked through the small house they were renting on the north side of town and looked at every door and every window and confirmed that everything was as it should be. And then she stood in the kitchen in the dark and made herself list the things that were true. Warren was in a federal facility in Massachusetts. Voss was awaiting sentencing. The contract was void. Her daughters were asleep in their beds. The dog governor, who had arrived in December as a brown and white bundle of uncomplicated enthusiasm, was asleep on the rug at the foot of Lily's bed. Everything was as it should be. She listed these things every night for 47 nights. On the 48th night, she slept until 6. Damien had his own version of this. He did not talk about it directly, which she had expected, but she could see it in the way he moved through rooms, the habit of noting exits that did not go away overnight, the instinct to position himself with his back to the wall that persisted long after there was any reason for it. She did not point these things out. She recognized them. She simply made sure that in their home and the routines they were building together, there was enough that was ordinary and unhurried and unremarkable that the vigilance had nothing to attach to. It took time. Most worthwhile things do. Lily helped in the way that children help with the things adults cannot fix in themselves, by being relentlessly present and relentlessly demanding and relentlessly unimpressed by anything that was not immediately applicable to her current project, which changed every 2 weeks and required the full participation of every adult in the household. In the first winter, it was learning the names of birds. In the spring, it was a garden of her own, a patch of the backyard that she insisted on planting and planting herself with Damien, providing labor under her direction. In the summer, it was sailing, which she approached with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to everything, reading about it before she tried it, asking questions that the retired fisherman down the street found increasingly impressive, and then doing it with a calm competence that her instructor described to Clara as frankly unusual for an 8-year-old. Damien was at the harbor the first morning Lily came back from sailing on her own. He had told Clara he had errands. He had been standing on the dock for 2 hours. Clara knew. She did not say anything. She made coffee and waited for them to come back, and when they came in through the kitchen door together, Lily, still in her life jacket and smelling like salt, talking without pause about the angle of the wind and what she had done wrong on the second tack and how she would correct it next time Damien carrying the jacket. After Lily had shrugged it off and kept talking, she looked at them and felt the thing she had been feeling for 2 years now, the thing that still sometimes surprised her with its completeness. She poured Lily a glass of juice and handed Damien his coffee and did not mention the harbor. June was 5 when she started asking questions about the before. Not the specific before, she did not have the vocabulary for that yet, but the conceptual before, the time that existed prior to her own memory, the years that had made the people around her into who they were. She asked Clara once why she kept the small notebook in the top drawer of her desk. Clara said it was for writing down things she needed to remember. June said, like what? Clara said, like dates, important ones. June thought about this. She said, is my birthday in there? Clara said, yes. June said, is Lily's birthday in there? Clara said, yes. June said, is there sad stuff in there too? Clara looked at her daughter, 5 years old and standing in the doorway of the office in her rain boots because she had been outside and had not bothered to take them off, her curly hair pulled back with a clip that was already coming loose, looking at her mother with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned to soften questions. Clara said, yes, there is sad stuff too. June nodded. She said, that is okay. Agnes says you have to write down the sad stuff so it does not get bigger. Clara said, Agnes is right. June said, okay. She turned and went back outside, rain boots thudding on the kitchen floor, and Clara sat at her desk for a moment and looked at the top drawer and thought about Agnes 2 blocks away in the bakery that smelled like bread on Sunday mornings, and thought about a woman she had never met who used to say that a house that only smells like money eventually stops feeling like a house. She opened the top drawer and took out the notebook and wrote the date because it was an important one, because June had just said something that was going to stay with her for a long time, and because Clara Hale had learned that the things worth keeping are the ones you write down before they get away from you. She put the notebook back and went outside to find her daughter. The shelter grew in its second year, adding 2 rooms and a second intake coordinator, a woman named Frances, who had come through the program herself 18 months before, and who ran the documentation training with a precision that matched Clara's own and a warmth that Clara recognized she was still developing. Frances brought coffee to the training sessions and told jokes that were slightly too dark for professional settings, and made every woman in the room feel that what she was learning was not a procedure but a survival skill being passed between people who understood what survival required. Clara watched her work and thought about continuity, about the way things get passed forward, about the specific responsibility of being someone who made it through and now had the knowledge and the standing to make it easier for the next person. She thought about the 43 women she had trained and the women they had trained and the documents those women were keeping somewhere in coat linings and locked phone folders and email drafts that were never sent the way the preparation accumulated in the world, like a quiet army of the careful and the watching, waiting for the moment when they would be strong enough to use what they had built. She thought that was enough. She thought that was, in fact, quite a lot. She went back into her office and looked at the folder in the bottom drawer, the one labeled done, and added to it the annual report she had just finished, 17 pages of outcomes and numbers and stories told in aggregate. The language of documentation, the grammar of evidence that she had learned in the worst years of her life and was now using in service of something that was entirely her own. She filed it. She closed the drawer. She went home.